Right now, inside the feeder hanging in your yard, something may be happening that nobody warned you about when you set it up. Not because you were careless. Not because the seed was bad when you bought it. Because summer changes everything about that feeder. This video will walk you through exactly what happens inside a feeder when temperatures climb, and what your birds actually need right now. Stay until the end. Because the last thing we cover is the one resource that matters more than every food you could put in that feeder. And once you understand why, you will never look at your yard the same way again. Welcome to Feather Logic. Let's get into it. There is a persistent idea that has quietly kept well-meaning people from feeding birds properly in summer. It is worth clearing up first. There is a persistent idea that you should stop once warm weather hits. Natural food is abundant. Insects are everywhere. The feeder seems unnecessary. Research has quietly taken this idea apart. Studies tracking feeder-dependent birds found they receive only about a quarter of their daily nutrition from feeders. Even birds that visit your feeder every single day. A bird with access to your feeder is not abandoning wild foraging. It is supplementing it. So the feeder is not a crutch. It is a backup system. But in summer, that backup system has a problem most people never think to check. Bird seed is not a stable substance. It is organic material. And organic material behaves very differently at 90 degrees than at 40. In cold, dry air, a full feeder can sit for over a week without serious risk. In summer heat, that same feeder can become dangerous in a matter of days. David Bonter, a researcher at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology who has studied feeder bird health extensively, has been direct about the central problem. The issue in summer is moving seed through the feeder fast enough that it does not sit in hot, humid conditions for extended periods. When humidity climbs into the 90s and temperatures stay in the 70s and above, conditions inside a feeder become close to ideal for mold growth. The mold species most commonly implicated is Aspergillus. According to Cornell Lab field guidance, it produces toxins that cause aspergillosis, digestive damage, in severe cases, death. And mold is not the only risk building invisibly inside a feeder you filled last week and haven't touched since. Cornell Lab and wildlife health officials have documented recurring outbreaks of salmonellosis tied directly to feeders in these exact conditions. Birds crowd feeding surfaces in larger numbers in summer. Droppings accumulate faster in the heat. Bacteria multiply in the buildup beneath. Species that gather in dense numbers at shared surfaces, finches, siskins, sparrows, become vulnerable fast when conditions align. None of this means you stop feeding. It means the feeder needs a completely different relationship with you than it did in January. The single most important habit shift has nothing to do with what kind of seed you buy. It is about how much you put out at once. Cornell Lab guidance is specific on this. Fill feeders only with the amount birds will realistically consume within 2 to 3 days. Not more. A feeder constantly topped to the brim is not generosity. It is a slow-spoiling reservoir, and the seed at the bottom molds first. That is the seed birds eat last, after the fresh layer on top has already been cleared. It is the most dangerous seed in the feeder. During heat waves, temperatures above 80, humidity staying high, replace seed entirely every 3 to 5 days, even when it looks fine. On the hottest, most humid days, that window shrinks further. If birds have been visiting less than usual, check the seed daily. Cleaning matters just as much as quantity. Hot soapy water, a dedicated brush, every few days in summer, not the bi-weekly schedule of winter. For high-traffic feeders, some guidance recommends cleaning as often as daily. The hulls and droppings beneath are part of the same cycle. Rake or sweep that buildup regularly. It is not cosmetic. It is what separates a feeding station from a health hazard. This single change, smaller amounts, replaced more often, cleaned more frequently, does more than any specific food you could add. But now to the part you probably came here for. What should actually be in the feeder? The biggest seasonal shift comes down to one word. Protein. In winter, birds need fat. Calories that burn slowly and keep a small body warm through a freezing night. Summer flips that entirely. Birds are not fighting cold right now. They are breeding. Raising chicks. Replacing worn feathers during molt. Every one of those processes runs on protein. This is where mealworms become, by a wide margin, the single most valuable addition you can make to a summer feeder. Research identifies them consistently. A nest full of hungry chicks requires dozens of feeding trips a day. Insects, what mealworms nutritionally mimic, drive nearly all of that effort. Offering mealworms does not replace what parents are gathering in the wild. It takes pressure off an exhausting calorie-burning routine at its peak. Bluebirds, insectivores that rarely show any interest in seed feeders, will come specifically for mealworms. Sometimes within days of a first offering. Wrens, titmice, chickadees, warblers. A wide range of summer songbirds you may never see at a seed feeder will respond to a mealworm dish. Live mealworms get the strongest response. But dried mealworms are nutritionally sound and hold up far better in summer heat than live ones do. Fresh fruit is the second major addition worth making in summer. Berries, halved grapes, small pieces of melon attract a different set of visitors. Orioles, catbirds, and a number of summer visitors are drawn to fruit in a way they are simply not drawn to seed at any time of year. The biology behind this is straightforward. These species evolved as fruit eaters. Their digestive systems are built to process sugars, not starch. Offering fruit at your feeder does not train them to abandon wild foraging. It tells them your yard is a reliable stop in a landscape that is getting hotter. The caution here is portion. Offer only what birds can consume in a few hours. Rotting fruit carries the same mold and bacteria risk as spoiled seed, faster. A grape left in 90-degree sun for 6 hours is not food anymore. Remove anything uneaten before it turns. This is not optional in summer heat. Suet still has a place in summer, but it needs one adjustment most people miss. Standard suet melts in heat, goes rancid, and coats feathers with residue. No-melt varieties, rendered multiple times specifically to hold their structure at higher temperatures, solve this problem almost entirely. Placing any suet feeder in a shaded location extends its safe window further. A woodpecker or nuthatch will find it in shade just as reliably as in sun. What suet offers in summer is different from what it offers in winter. In winter, it is survival fuel. In summer, it is a concentrated protein bridge. For species like woodpeckers and nuthatches that visit suet year-round, the no-melt version keeps a reliable food source available through the heat. We are not even at the most important part yet. What comes next is the one thing most feeding guides do not tell you, and should. Here is where everything we have covered points to a single conclusion. One that most feeding guides bury at the bottom. Or skip entirely. Water. Not as a nice addition. Not as a seasonal bonus. As the resource that outweighs everything else in your yard this summer. Every piece of research on summer bird health circles back to the same finding. Heat stress, not hunger, is the dominant survival pressure birds face right now. A bird can survive several days without abundant food. It cannot survive long without water, especially while breeding, feeding chicks, or molting. And unlike food, which summer's insect abundance genuinely provides in large supply, water in a heat-stressed landscape is frequently scarce. Think about what a heat wave does to a suburban neighborhood. Pavement radiates. Lawns dry out. Puddles disappear within hours of forming. The natural water sources birds relied on for generations, shallow pools, slow stream edges, muddy patches, vanish exactly when they are needed most. A shallow water source, 1 to 2 inches deep, changed regularly, fills a gap in the summer landscape that seed cannot fill under any circumstances. It attracts species that will never visit a seed feeder at all. Warblers, vireos, tanagers, birds that pass through your yard invisibly otherwise. It gives nesting parents a place to cool down between exhausting feeding runs. It gives molting birds low-risk access without traveling far from cover. Molting birds are more vulnerable than at almost any other point in their year. Their flight is compromised. They stay low, stay close, avoid open travel. A water source close to cover, not in the middle of an open lawn, is something a molting bird can access without exposing itself to a hawk. Placement matters as much as presence. A source in full sun heats quickly and becomes nearly useless to a bird trying to cool down by midday. Dappled shade keeps the water cooler through the hottest part of the afternoon. Clay or stone basins retain lower temperatures longer than thin plastic in direct light. Refresh the water daily or every few days at minimum. Standing water in heat is exactly the environment that allows bacterial problems to multiply. The same logic that applies to seed applies to water. Small amounts, refreshed consistently, are safer than large volumes left to sit and warm. A dripper or a slow trickle of moving water changes this further. Birds locate water by sound. Moving water carries across a yard in ways still water cannot. Everything we have covered so far, the seed, the protein, the fruit, all of it depends on one thing being present in your yard first. If you have a feeder full of perfect summer food, mealworms, ripe fruit, no-melt suet, fresh seed replaced every 3 days, and no water nearby, you have built half of what your yard's birds actually need this season. The water is not the finishing touch. It is the foundation everything else sits on. Whether your yard becomes a place birds return to through the hardest weeks, or a place they visit once and move past, often comes down to this single resource. A feeder in summer is not the same object it was in January. In winter, it is a calorie source. In summer, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a support system for breeding, for replacing worn feathers during molt, for surviving heat that strains a bird's body more than almost anything in its year. What you put in that feeder this summer, and just as importantly, how you maintain it, is not a minor seasonal adjustment to what you do in winter. It is a completely different set of decisions for a completely different set of pressures that your birds are navigating right now, in real time. Smaller amounts, replaced more often. Protein alongside seed, not instead of it. Fruit offered in restraint. Suet adjusted for heat. Water placed and refreshed. None of this requires expensive equipment or dramatic changes to your routine. It requires understanding that July is not January, for you or for them. The parent bird on its 40th feeding trip of the day, working without pause through heat you would not stand in for more than a few minutes at a time. The molting chickadee staying low in the shrubs, cover-bound and cautious, needing water it cannot safely travel far to find. The bluebird that has never once visited your seed feeder, not once, but would come every single day for mealworms if you offered them. They are all out there right now, working through one of the hardest seasons of their year. What you do with your yard this week is not small. For the birds depending on it, on your specific yard, your specific feeder, your specific water source, it is not small at all. Tell me in the comments, have you tried mealworms or a water source this summer? And if this helped, share it with someone who feeds birds. If this changed the way you see what is happening in your yard right now, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.